41 civilizations had received the same treatment. First came the survey ships, then the diplomatic vessels with their carefully worded demands, then the fleet. It had worked 41 times without a single loss. High Marshal Sorvan saw no reason the 42nd would be different. He stood at the forward observation port of his flagship and looked at the Terran boundary markers floating in the dark. Rows of orange beacon lights stretching in both directions, disappearing into the black. Behind them, nothing. No ships on sensors. No defensive grid pinging back at his scouts. Just empty space and those blinking lights, like the humans thought a string of lanterns would stop an empire. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Ulix, stood 3 paces behind him holding a data pad. He had been holding it for 20 minutes. He had not spoken yet because every time he tried, Sorvan's expression made it clear the words would not be welcome. Outside, the 7th Expansion Fleet filled the view. 230 ships. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, siege platforms. The largest force Sorvan had ever commanded. More firepower than most civilizations would see in 10 lifetimes. They sent 2 warnings, Ulix said finally. They always do. The second one had footage attached from the last fleet that crossed this boundary. Ulix paused. The Varathi fleet, 60 years ago. Sorvan turned from the window. The Varathi were poorly organized and had no business being in this sector. We are not the Varathi. The footage showed their entire forward column destroyed in under 4 minutes. Old data, old weapons. The humans have not fought a real war since. Sorvan waved a hand. They have been sitting behind those beacons for 6 decades building settlements and trading grain. They are farmers, Ulix, comfortable farmers who remember a war their grandparents fought. Ulix set the data pad down on the console. He did not argue. He had read the full threat assessment files, all 900 pages of them, twice. He knew what was in those files, and he knew Sorvan had not read past the executive summary. He also knew that pointing this out would end his career, so he said nothing and watched the beacons blink. On Terran Boundary Station Harrow, Admiral Dara Rowe was not watching the Rithian fleet through glass. She was watching it on 12 screens at once, pulled from sensors spread across 400 kilometers of monitored space. She could see the heat signatures of their engines, the communication bursts between their ships, the rotation schedules of their patrol craft. She had been watching them mass for 3 weeks. Captain Fenn Artie stood next to her with his arms crossed. He was younger than Rowe by 15 years, and he still had the habit of showing tension in his jaw. She had noticed it the first week and had never mentioned it. They cut 3 beacons on the outer edge last night, he said. I know. Testing response time. I know. He looked at the screens, 230 contacts. He had run the numbers 3 times that morning. He would not share what the numbers said. Rowe already knew. Do you think they actually cross? He asked. Rowe did not look up from the screens. They always do. She pulled up the station's operations board and moved through it with the practiced calm of someone who had already made every decision that needed making. Silent running on all ships confirmed. Mine belt armed and active across 9 grid sectors. Automated response grid live. Communication intercept array at full sensitivity. Every human hull in the sector running cold and dark, tucked into positions chosen 3 years ago by people who had read those same threat assessment files the Rithians had access to and ignored. If they come in hot, she said, I want them deep in Sector 4 before we show them anything. Let them think it's empty. Let them get comfortable. Arties nodded. He had heard this before. He believed it. Back across the boundary, Sorvan had made his decision. He turned from the observation port and walked to his command chair. Governor Pale, the civilian administrator assigned to oversee the post-conquest administration of Terran space, sat in an auxiliary seat near the rear of the bridge. He was a small man with expensive clothes and the permanently unsettled look of someone who had never been near a battle. He had arrived 2 days ago with 4 assistants, and a filing system already set up for processing Terran colonial records. "We cross it next cycle," Sorvan said. Pale straightened up. "Excellent. I have prepared intake documentation for the first 12 Terran settlements." Ulix looked at his data pad. He thought about the 900 pages. He thought about the footage from 60 years ago. He set the pad face down on the console and said nothing. Outside the flagship's windows, the boundary beacons began to go dark. Not all at once. One at a time, from left to right, like lights being turned off in a corridor at the end of a long night. On Station Harrow, an alert chimed once on Ro's board. She looked at it. Beacons 7 through 19 offline. She silenced the alert. She did not increase her pace. She did not reach for a communication channel. She looked at Ardes and said, "Get some rest. It starts tomorrow." He looked at the dark stretch where the beacons used to be. He did not sleep. The first thing Sorvan noticed when his fleet crossed the boundary was how quiet it was. No challenge broadcast, no incoming fire, no scrambling of human ships on the sensor grid. His forward destroyers pushed 3 kilometers into Terran space and reported nothing. His scouts moved 10 kilometers in and found the same. Empty space, drifting rock, the distant glow of a star that did not care who crossed what line. He had expected at least a protest signal. "Advance formation," he said. "Standard expansion sweep." The fleet moved in. 230 ships spread wide across the entry corridor, pushing forward in the slow, deliberate pattern the Empire had used 41 times before. Sorvan watched the sensor feeds. Nothing came back at him. He allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The threat assessment files had been written by nervous officials who saw danger in every shadow. The humans were not going to fight. They were going to do what most civilizations did when faced with this much firepower: freeze, then negotiate, then surrender. Ulix was watching a different set of readings: passive sensors, residual heat traces in the asteroid clusters ahead, small, easy to miss, the kind of signatures a ship left when it had been sitting cold for a very long time. He opened his mouth. The first mine went off against the hull of destroyer Verath 6. The explosion was clean, precise, and took out the port engine column in one burst. The ship began to turn on its own axis, leaking drive plasma. Then the second mine hit a cruiser 2 kilometers to the left. Then 3 more, all at once, spread across the middle of the formation. Sorvan was on his feet. Point defense full activation, scanned the corridor. The point defense systems came up and started picking off mines as fast as they could track them, but the mines were not coming in a single wave. They were already there, planted months or years ago in overlapping fields, positioned to drive ships into specific paths. When a cluster detonated on the left, it pushed traffic right. When the right side went, it pushed the ships back left. Each corridor they tried to take funneled them into more. 4 destroyers were already dead in the water before a single Terran weapon had been fired by a crew. On Harrow Station, Ardes watched the mine grid performing exactly as the engineers had said it would. He had never fully believed it until now. He said nothing because there was nothing to say. Ro opened a channel. Her voice went out across the entire fleet frequency, crisp and without inflection. "This is Admiral Dara Ro, Terran Compact Defense Command. You are operating inside protected sovereign territory. I have 47 warships currently deployed across this sector. I have 9 active mine belt grids with approximately 4,000 charges remaining. I have a long-range strike platform positioned at grid reference 79er that your sensors have not located yet. You have lost 4 ships in the last 90 seconds without my crews firing a single round. I am offering you a clean withdrawal right now. Take your fleet back to your own side of the boundary, and this ends here. You have 60 seconds to respond before I stop offering." Sorvan stared at the channel indicator. 47 ships. He had 230. Even with the mine damage, even with 4 destroyers dead in the water, the numbers were not close. He had seen what 47 ships looked like. They were nothing. She was lying about the platform. She was probably lying about the mine count too. This was the last desperate play of a species that had nothing left to put on the table. He looked at Ulix. Ulix was very still. "She is bluffing," Sorvan said. Ulix said, "I don't think she is." Sorvan sat back down. "Full advance, push through the mine corridor. They cannot have laid enough to stop this fleet." The 60 seconds ended. Ro closed the channel. She looked at Ardes once. He was already at his board. She said, "Light them up." And the dark between the asteroids stopped being dark. Ships that had been sitting cold for 3 years came online in sequence. Not ahead of the Rithian fleet, not in the path they were watching, but from the sides and from behind. From the rock clusters, their scouts had flown past without a second scan. From the debris fields that showed nothing on active sensors, because the hulls had been coated in materials that swallowed the ping. From positions above and below the ecliptic, where no attacking fleet ever thought to look, because no fleet in 41 campaigns had ever been waiting there. On the Rithian flagship, every screen lit up with new contacts at once. Governor Pale rose from his seat at the back of the bridge. He looked at the displays. He looked at Sorvan. He looked at Ulix. Ulix had his eyes on the data, and his hands were very flat on the console, pressing down as if he needed something to hold on to. "How many?" Sorvan said quietly. Ulix read the screen. 46 confirmed contacts. One is still not showing on sensors. He paused. She was not lying about the platform. Outside the flagship, the battle that Sorvan had believed would last 3 hours before human surrender was already something else entirely. The first Terran strike packages were in the air, and they were not aimed at hulls. They were aimed at engines. The Rithian Empire had a doctrine for naval engagements that had not changed in 200 years. Overwhelm with mass. Force the enemy to split their attention. Drive through the center and let the flanks clean up whatever survived. It was a doctrine built on the assumption that the enemy would be visible when the battle started. That assumption was now a problem. Sorvan's formation tried to pivot left when the first human ships appeared on the right flank. They were still pivoting when more ships came in from the left. When the rear contacts lit up on sensors, the formation's rear column turned to face them, which meant nobody was watching the front when the ships tucked inside the near asteroid belt went active. The Rithian fleet, for 40 seconds, was pointing in 4 directions at once. Ro watched it on the tactical display and said nothing. Her ships were not attacking randomly. They had assigned targets before the battle started. Every Terran captain had a list. First on every list, communication vessels. The small, lightly armed ships that carried the Rithian fleet's coordination signals between capital ships. They were not impressive targets. They went down fast. And when they were gone, Sorvan's 200 ships could still move and still fire, but they could no longer talk to each other in real time without routing signals through the flagship, which added a 6-second delay to every order. 6 seconds was a long time when someone was taking out your engines. The Terran targeting was strange by any standard the Rithians had seen. No enemy fleet in recorded history had passed up clean shots at drive cores to instead hit the magnetic collars on engine pods. A destroyed core killed the ship. A destroyed collar just stopped it. The distinction seemed wasteful. Sorvan's tactical officers spent 10 full minutes trying to figure out what the humans were actually going for before they understood that stopping a ship was exactly the point. Ro was building a wall. Each disabled Rithian ship became an obstacle, drifting hulks with live crews and working weapons, but no ability to move. The fleet was eating its own space, filling the entry corridor with 200 meters of dead metal at a time. Ships trying to advance had to navigate around their own disabled comrades. Ships trying to retreat found the corridor shrinking behind them. In the middle of this, Ulix was doing calculations. He ran them twice and got the same answer both times. He approached Sorvan. "High Marshal, we have lost drive function on 31 ships. We have lost 18 communication relays. Our formation integrity is at 40% and falling. If we do not begin withdrawal within the next 7 minutes, the rear of the corridor will be blocked by our own disabled units." Sorvan was looking at the central display. He was watching a Rithian cruiser, the Voranthas, fire 3 volleys at a human destroyer that kept moving laterally at a speed that should not have been possible for a ship its size. All 3 volleys missed. The human ship returned 1 shot and took out the Voranthas' main gun array without touching anything else. "They are targeting our weapons," Sorvan said. He sounded like a man working something out slowly. "Yes," Ulix said. "They are not trying to kill us. They are removing our ability to fight while keeping the ships intact." Sorvan turned and looked at him with an expression Ulix had not seen on him before. Not anger, something quieter than that. "Why?" Sorvan said. "Because dead ships block corridors. Disabled ships can be towed clear. If they wanted us dead, we would be dead." Ulix held his gaze. "They planned this engagement to last exactly as long as it needs to. We are not being destroyed, High Marshal. We are being managed." From the far end of the sector, a tight beam signal left a Terran relay station and traveled at light speed toward the second Rithian fleet holding outside the boundary. Admiral Breck's 200 ships were watching the entry corridor on sensors, waiting for Sorvan's forward push to break through so they could follow. The signal reached them 40 seconds later. It was not a warning. It carried no text at all. It was a direct sensor feed of what was happening to the First Fleet. Real-time footage. Every disabled ship. Every drifting cruiser. The mine corridors still chewing through the formation's edges. And at the end of the feed, spliced in so it played last, a single audio line from a human woman whose voice had not changed in tone since the battle started. "You are next if you move." Admiral Breck watched the footage for 90 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "All ships hold position. Do not cross the boundary. I want a channel to the Terran side." His communications officer looked at him. Breck said, "Now." Back inside the kill zone, Sorvan was no longer talking about breaking through. He was standing at the display watching ship after ship lose drive power and go dark while their crews stayed alive inside. The humans were very precise. Nobody was dying who did not have to. That was, somehow, worse than if they had been firing for blood. He turned to Governor Pale, who had not moved from his seat in 20 minutes, and whose face had gone a flat grayish color that Rithians showed when they were frightened. "Governor," Sorvan said, "I suggest you set aside your intake documentation." Pale said nothing. Outside the flagship, 3 Terran ships completed a coordinated arc that left Sorvan's port flank completely without functioning drive columns. None of his weapons could track them fast enough to respond. The humans were not even rushing. Governor Pale had spent 30 years inside the Galactic Empire's administrative system. He understood hierarchy. He understood procedure. He understood that when a situation exceeded your authority, you escalated to someone above you and let them carry the weight. The problem, at this specific moment, was that the communication channels were jammed, and there was nobody above him for 40 light minutes in any direction. He found Ulix near the tactical station and grabbed his arm. "I need a status report," Pale said. "In plain language, not military language, plain." Ulix looked at him, then at the displays, then at Pale again. He seemed to decide something. "We cannot move 61 ships. We have lost all dedicated communication relays. Every order from the High Marshal has a 6-second delay before it reaches our fleet captains. The human ships are faster, more maneuverable, and have been firing for 40 minutes without making a single targeting error. The Second Fleet has not crossed the boundary. We have no way to reach them." Pale absorbed this. What do the threat assessment files say about this scenario? They say this scenario should not happen because we should not have crossed the boundary. Pale let go of his arm. He walked back to his seat, sat down, and looked at the intake documentation on his data pad. 12 folders. One per settlement, forms already labeled, processing timelines already drafted. He turned the pad face down on his knee. Sorvan was at the center of the bridge running attack vectors that had stopped working 20 minutes ago. He had ordered 3 ram formations in the last half hour. Each time, the targeted human ships simply moved. Not fast, not dramatically. They just stepped out of the path the way someone steps around a slow animal on a road. The Rithian ships that had tried to ram them were now pointing in random directions with their engines stripped. Outside the boundary, Admiral Breck had received no answer from Sorvan in 40 minutes. The channel was open. Nothing came back. He had watched the sensor feed from Ro's relay station twice more and each time came away with the same conclusion. He opened a channel to the Terran side himself. The response came in 11 seconds. He had expected to speak with some junior officer. Instead, Ro's voice came through directly. He said, "Admiral Ro, I command the Second Fleet currently holding at Grid Marker 4. I have not crossed the boundary. I want to understand the terms of engagement." Ro said, "Your fleet is on your side of the line. I have no quarrel with you today." Breck said, "If I advance, what happens?" Ro said, "You become my problem. You have 1 hour to begin withdrawal before that changes. I would encourage you to use the hour." Breck said, "I cannot reach High Marshal Sorvan." Ro said, "I know." Then the channel closed. Breck sat with that for a moment. Then he ordered a full halt and began rotating his fleet into a slow reverse posture. He was a career officer, not a proud man, and he saw the numbers clearly enough. He did not know exactly what was inside that sector, but he knew that whatever it was had taken apart 200 ships in under an hour without losing a single hull. Inside the kill zone, Sorvan's flagship took a single precision hit on its main weapons array. The explosion was contained, exact, and left every other system on the ship completely untouched. Power, shields, communications, life support, all fine. The weapons were gone. Sorvan looked at the damage report. He understood then what Ulix had been trying to tell him 40 minutes ago. This was not a battle. It had never been a battle. A battle was 2 forces trying to destroy each other. This was a demonstration, and the humans were making a very specific point. They could have killed him at any moment and had chosen not to. He found that more unsettling than a direct attack would have been. He said, "Order what drives we have to push to ram formation. All available ships." Ulix did not move to his board. Sorvan looked at him. Ulix said quietly, "With respect, High Marshal, we have drives on 40 ships. If we push them into ram formation, the humans will disable them at range before any of them close to striking distance. We will lose our last mobile units and block the corridor with 40 more hulks. We will have no fleet left and no way out." Sorvan said, "That is an order." Ulix transmitted the order. 14 minutes later, 40 Rithian ships were drifting without engines, and the corridor behind them was almost completely blocked by dead metal. On Harrow Station, Ardes watched the last mobile cluster go dark on his display. He did some arithmetic. He said, "That's it. They've got nothing left that can move under its own power." Ro was filling in an incident report on a side screen. She had started it 12 minutes into the engagement. She said, "Good." Ardes looked at her. "You started the paperwork during the fight." She said, "Command always wants forms before anything else. Get ahead of it." She did not look up. "Tell me when Sorvan opens a channel." It took 11 more minutes. Then the board lit up with an incoming signal from the Rithian flagship. Ardes looked at the indicator. He looked at Ro. She finished her sentence in the incident report, saved it. Then she reached over and opened the channel. Back on Earth, in a long room on the 4th floor of Terran Compact Defense Command's relay hub, Fleet Dispatch Officer Yara Singh had been awake for 22 hours. Her job was signal routing. She took incoming data from the border sectors, tagged it, sorted it by priority, and pushed it to the right desks. Under normal conditions, this was quiet work. Most shifts passed without anything more urgent than a freighter reporting a debris strike or a survey team filing a late position update. Tonight was not a normal shift. She had been routing battle telemetry from the Harrow Station sector for most of it. Not interpreting, not advising, just routing. But she had eyes and she could read a sensor feed. By hour 16, she knew the Rithians had crossed. By hour 19, she knew the first fleet was stopped. By hour 21, she had watched enough of the real-time data to understand that the humans had not lost a single ship. She made herself a second cup of instant soup from the dispenser in the hallway. She came back. The feeds were still coming in. She kept routing. On the other side of the sector, High Marshal Sorvan had his channel open and was choosing his words carefully for the first time since this had started. "Admiral Rowe," he said, "I am proposing a ceasefire. Both sides agree to hold position while terms are established through formal diplomatic channels. This engagement has cost both parties considerably, and a measured resolution would serve the interests of." Rowe's voice came back flat and immediate. "Both parties have not lost anything. I have not lost a ship." A pause. "There has been mutual disruption of." "High Marshal, I'm not negotiating." A short pause. "I have terms. You will withdraw all Rithian forces to the positions they held before your expansion activity began in this sector. You will restore every boundary beacon your fleet removed or disabled. You will transmit a formal acknowledgement on open Imperial channels that the Terran Compact's territorial markers are legally recognized, and that Rithian forces violated sovereign territory today. And you will arrange the immediate return of 3 Terran survey vessels seized in this region approximately 2 years ago. Those crews are to be unharmed." Sorvan was quiet for 4 seconds. "The open channel acknowledgement is not something I can agree to unilaterally. That is an Imperial policy matter requiring. I have weapons online. You do not. That is the full extent of my negotiating position." Another pause. Longer. Somewhere behind Sorvan, audible faintly through the open channel, Governor Pale could be heard composing something on a keyboard. He had given up on the intake documentation and moved on to a different kind of document. Ulix was watching the sensor display. 47 Terran ships, all still active, all still in position. The long-range platform that had never shown up on sensors at all was presumably still out there somewhere doing whatever it had been doing silently for the entire engagement. Every ship Sorvan had brought into this sector was now either drifting, disabled, or waiting for a tow. He thought about the 900 pages of threat assessment. He thought about the footage from 60 years ago. He thought about the 41 civilizations, and how all of them had presumably also thought the Terrans would blink first. He did not say any of this to Sorvan. Sorvan already knew. "The open channel acknowledgement," Sorvan said, "will be seen across the Empire as a public admission of defeat." Rowe said yes. The word sat on the channel for a moment. "It will damage my standing irreparably." Rowe said, "That is not my concern." Sorvan said nothing for 12 seconds. Ulix counted them. Then Sorvan opened the Imperial broadcast channel, the one that reached every Rithian naval installation and civilian receiver in range. His voice, when it came, was very even. "This is High Marshal Sorvan, commander of the 7th Expansion Fleet. The Terran Compact's territorial boundary markers are legally established and recognized under Galactic Convention. Rithian forces today operated within Terran sovereign space without authorization. All Rithian units are ordered to withdraw to pre-expansion positions pending full diplomatic review." He closed the channel. Yara Singh was routing a batch of sensor logs when the Imperial broadcast hit her incoming queue. It was not addressed to her station. It had been picked up by a passive receiver in the relay hub that collected open-channel Imperial transmissions for archival purposes. It was tagged routine. She almost let it root automatically. She opened it instead. She read it twice, then she listened to the audio. She printed a copy on the office printer, the old physical one that nobody used anymore because everything was digital. The printer took 40 seconds and made a grinding noise. She took the paper, folded it once, and put it in the top drawer of her desk. She did not know exactly who would want it later. She was fairly sure somebody would. She finished her soup. She kept routing. Outside Harrow Station, Arties watched the Second Rithian Fleet's engine signatures shift. They were turning around, slow and steady. No drama, just a lot of very large ships deciding that the direction they had come from was better than the direction they had been pointing. He looked at Ro. She was back on the incident report. "Second Fleet is withdrawing," he said. "Good," she said. Sorvan just broadcast an acknowledgement on open Imperial channels. She said, "I know, I was on the channel." She kept typing. "Get me a damage assessment on the mine belts. I want to know what needs restocking before the week is out." Arties looked at her for a moment. Then he went to get the mine belt figures. The Rithian recovery ships arrived 2 days later. They came with their running lights on and their weapons powered down, which was the correct protocol. They had sent a request through the boundary relay channel 6 hours in advance and received a single-word response from Harrow Station. Approved. They moved into the kill zone slowly, picking through the debris corridors, attaching tow cables to the disabled hulls one at a time. Ro allowed it without conditions. She posted 2 Terran escorts to move alongside the recovery operation. Not to threaten, just to be visible. The Rithian recovery crews could see them out their windows, 2 human ships running parallel at matching speed, saying nothing, doing nothing, just present. Every captain in the recovery fleet logged the exact specifications of those human ships in their reports. The intelligence people in the Rithian capital would have very detailed measurements within the week. That was fine with Ro. She wanted them to have accurate measurements. The recovery took 3 days. 58 disabled Rithian ships towed back through the boundary. 11 that had taken too much mine damage to tow in one piece were broken down and moved in sections. The Terran escorts matched speed throughout. When the last Hulk cleared the line, both escorts peeled off and returned to their positions without a word. Sorvan was not aboard his flagship for the withdrawal. He had transferred to a smaller vessel before the recovery operation began. Nobody officially announced where he went. Ulix, who had been running the logistics of the recovery from the lead tug, was approached by 3 separate internal affairs officers before the fleet reached its home station. He answered every question they asked and did not volunteer anything they did not ask for. He kept the 900 pages of threat assessment files on a personal drive. He had a feeling they would be relevant again someday. Governor Pale's report reached the capital 4 days after the fleet crossed back. It was 47 pages long and argued in careful administrative language that the operation had been poorly conceived, that the risk assessments had been insufficient, and that civilian oversight had been inadequately resourced for the scope of the mission. It did not mention that he had arrived with intake documentation already filed. It did not mention that he had not raised a single concern before the fleet crossed the boundary. He was a very good bureaucrat. The 3 Terran survey ships were returned 1 week later. A Rithian diplomatic courier delivered them to the boundary without ceremony. The crews came off looking tired and somewhat underfed but otherwise unharmed. They were debriefed by Compact Intelligence for 2 days and then sent home. No press event. No formal statement from the Compact Council. The ships were logged as recovered and the case file was closed. On Earth, Yara Singh came in for her next shift and found a stack of routine routing queues waiting. She worked through them. Around midday, a colleague leaned over and asked if she had heard anything from the Harrow sector. She said she had been monitoring it. He asked if it was really true that no human ships had been lost. She said yes. He said that was unbelievable. She said it really was not if you had read the right files. He had not read the files. Nobody outside the defense architecture teams had. That was also probably intentional. The War Council debated a diplomatic delegation for 11 days. The debate was quiet, not public, and mostly circled around the question of whether reaching out first would make the Terran compact look eager or confident. In the end, a preliminary note was sent through the standard interstellar channel asking if the Rithian capital wished to establish a formal incident review process. The response took 9 days and said yes. Ro was asked for her opinion on the diplomatic track. She sent a 3-sentence response that said diplomacy was a reasonable complement to defensive preparation, that the mine belts should not be reduced regardless of how the diplomacy went, and that she would need 2 additional sensor arrays on the outer grid within the next 6 months. Nobody argued with any of the 3 sentences. 6 weeks after the battle, Harrow Station was running normal operations again. The beacons had been restored and were all active. The mine belts had been restocked. 3 new ships had quietly joined the prepositioned cold-running fleet. Nothing about this was announced to anyone. Arties was at the observation window late one night, not because his shift required it but because he could not sleep. The boundary line stretched across the view. All the beacons were lit. The space beyond was dark and quiet. Second Fleet's residual heat signatures were gone, cleared weeks ago. Whatever was out there now was either Rithian ships running too far back to sea or nothing. He heard Ro's boots on the deck behind him. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Came to check the grid reports." He looked at the dark beyond the beacons. "Do you think they come back? Try again someday." She stood next to him and looked out the window. "Probably," she said. "And we'll be ready." She looked at the beacons for a moment. Then she said, "We are always ready, that's the whole point." She turned and walked toward the corridor. "Get some sleep, Arties." He stayed at the window for a while longer, watching the beacons blink in the dark. One after another, steady and patient. Right where they had always been.